public who would like to speak on this. And the first person that I have is Dax McCarty. He's an outfitter and Wagon Hound Outfitters.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner and Commissioners. Speaking about Area 7, the bear area that was presented as one of the models. One of the, and I'll kind of address a few of my viewpoints, I guess. One of them is this area size for the management of this bear population. I mean, it's a very large area. It takes on the whole Laramie Range. So we have the Laramie region, kind of that Albany County line to the south, and then we have the Casper region, to the north. So, and then it involves some Platte County as well. I just think it's probably a low quota for the area size, and as far as I can tell, a lot of the bears are killed in the north part of that area. I think that the proposal this year is to increase that quota, which I agree with, based on what we're seeing, what I've seen the last several years, as far as bears we have on baits, bears we're seeing on trail cameras, and looking at, sometimes you get multiple, the same bear you'll get on different cameras, so we try to, really distinguish the different bears and get it accurate. I personally do, just to get an accurate idea of, just because we have, 5 bears here and 5 bears here, I'm not saying that's 10 bears, because sometimes they cross and go to the same or different baits. So I'm trying to be realistic as far as that goes. So I think the proposal is 2 additional in the fall, which it does close early. My question is, how much of that is because there's more sportsmen out there because of deer seasons, elk seasons, and the bear activity is just greater during the fall. They're feeding, they're eating berries, they're on the creeks. And so I think a lot of the bears, seems to me from what I hear from general public and other outfitters, it's kind of opportunistic. They're carrying an elk license or a deer license, but they bought a bear license. So they see a bear, they're going to shoot it. So I don't know that we're as selective during the fall, and we don't personally really hunt them in the fall unless on occasion I think we've taken 2 bears in the fall, and it's over baits, and we always try to kill mature older bears, trying to select 4 boars, males. But I would like to see it, and as I said, if we don't get it changed now, I'd still probably express my viewpoint that maybe it changes down the road. But I would like to see us increasing the quota. I personally think we could do 2 in the spring, 2 and the fall. But if we did only 2, I'd like to see it in the spring. Part of what Commissioner Little was saying about the bighorns, and I can't speak to the bighorns, but even in the Laramie Range, which is a fairly accessible mountain range, a lot of the public hunters cannot really access the baits that they have registered because of the snow. Especially when we have more snow and drifts, and even though all our snow blows away, but the drifts prevent you to getting to where you want to go. I think that adding to that mortality quota in the spring could maybe provide those people the chance to go ahead and access their baits later in May when they can get to their baits. And usually those people that are hunting in the spring, I think, are a little more serious about choosing what bears they're shooting. I mean, if there's 1 bear left on the quota, let's be realistic. I mean, if I have an out-of-state hunter, there's 1 bear left on the quota. He traveled from Mississippi to come hunt with me. There's a bear walks in, it's going to be harder to talk him out of shooting that bear because it might be closed tomorrow, when we check the quota. And I do really try to, I think out of the years, we've only been hunting bears there actively for the last 3 or 4 years, I guess, and we've killed four females out of 15 bears, and some of that realistically was because there's 1 bear left on the quota. And we just, my hunters didn't feel like they should pass on that. But so both from an outfitting standpoint and running a business, it's hard for me to book hunts, and I just won't do it late in May because I don't want a chance that it's closed and those guys make trip, plans and all that. But as far as the public hunters and their opportunity, I think, if increasing that in the spring, helps them possibly be able to have some time to get to their baits when the snow kind of starts to recede a little bit. And then if that quota isn't met, it carries over to the fall. And I just, I think with our bear population, at least where I'm observing, I think it's healthy. I mean, it's, we're taking some mature bears, mature male bears mainly. The other thing that I'd like to say, I guess, is that in the fall, just the hunter pressure, people are less selective. It does close earlier, and I just think some of those are probably incidental kills by other people hunting other species. Although there are probably a lot of people baiting bears. For future considerations, I'd also like to bring up possibly looking at the Laramie Peak Area 7 as maybe a split. I just don't know from a biological standpoint. I've talked to a lot of the game fish people in our region, and I have a lot of respect for what they say, and they tell me my reasons aren't so backgrounded sometimes as I do theirs. But anyway, they have a good feel for what's there, and they do take our input as well as the public input, which I appreciate. But as far as that large of an area, I would like to at least have everybody look at where the bears are being killed. Is it north? Is it south? And is there a division like the Albany-Commerce County line? We could kind of split that area a little bit just to better manage the population, and maybe there's bigger density in the in that north part of Area 7. But if that's the case, I personally, just based on the small area that I hunt and that we bait, I think that even a mortality quota of 4 in just that half of Area 7, to me, I think we'd still sustain a healthy bear population. So,
where do you, if you look at that Albany and Commerce County line, where do you? You won't tell anybody, but where do you hunt?
We're on the Commerce County side of it. We do have land on the Laramie side as well. The Albany County, we don't really go over there, and we don't hunt bears over there. And it's a lot of mine is mainly in the Labonte drainage, and kind of the drainage is off that Labonte drainage. And I really don't we don't hunt a large area, and we don't hunt probably half of what land we could, just because we haven't really pushed our bear hunts that much. We just we do it a little bit in the spring, and it's getting more and more popular, but we just haven't spread out as much as we can. But and I've talked to other hunters and friends, public hunters as well as outfitters that are in that area, and seems like the sentiment's I guess kind of the same as far as the bear population. We've seen it just on the ranch. We've seen a little bit more bear conflict, and we had to take care of a bear, a boar, a young boar this year that we just didn't want to. We had several interactions with him, and tried to haze him off with a slingshot and whatever, but the bear, he wouldn't stay away, and he was getting into, trying to break into the houses and the cabins and getting into the garbage. And so we have to remove that bear, which you hate to do, but we've had others that just kind of went away, which you'd rather have that happen, that they don't come back, because they're kind of curious at certain times in the season in their life. But anyways, it's interesting to hear the biologists talk about this, but I guess that's kind of all I had to say, is just that I think just the spring season is, to me, I think it makes sense, and then those bear hunters that are more serious will have maybe an opportunity to get up to those baits and actually be able to hunt a little later and be choosy, and maybe we will have more adult males being harvested. So
Thank you very much. Any other questions?
Yes.
Commissioner Culver.
President Little. So, to your request to move the 2 additional quota to the spring, how early in the spring is that season closing?
It's really, there's a few seasons in the last 4 years that if I recall, 2 out of 4 that, if I'm not mistaken, that haven't closed, and they've carried those over to the fall at the current quota. But it usually, if it does close, it's going to close the last week of May. So it's
Does the fall season close?
Yes,
We meet the,
it typically closes within a week or two, I think, of September 1. But I don't follow that as much because we typically don't. We aren't hunting them.
so help me understand why we would want to move the additional 2 bears to the spring versus the fall.
Yes, sir, Commissioner Culver. I feel like there's just the hunters are maybe more choosy then, instead of just hunting elk or deer. And I'm not saying they're all doing that, but they're maybe being a little more selective in what bears. So they might pass on some younger bears, smaller bears, hoping that they get a bigger bear that ultimately I would hope that it's a boar, and that helps sustain the population in a healthy way. But and I also think that, I mean, anybody can get up in the mountains and bait in September or August, 15th August, September. But there's a lot of guys that can't get up to their baits. I can, so it doesn't affect me as far as that goes. But I think later, once you get to the middle of May, I think you can get about anywhere into those baits. So I think that those it would just still provide the harvest of 2 more bears, and I think there's a likelihood that it would carry over to the fall. Some of those bears, like the season, would not close in the spring.
What was the answer?
Well, I just think that I think
You want the 2 carried to the fall.
no, I would like.
Those 2 will be carried to the fall.
Right. If let's say you have two females, you have a quota of 6 in the spring, and you kill 4 females that spring, they're going to carry those 2 to the fall, and so it would add bears to the fall if that was the case. I mean, this is not they may close in the spring. I'm just saying that because it hasn't closed in the past in the spring, I think our likelihood of maybe if we increase those in the spring, it'll increase opportunity, but also increase the chance that we'll already have a couple more bears on the quota in the fall.
Commissioner Price.
President Little, and basically what you're saying, though, in the fall, those bears, if you take 2 of them carried over, then it's more likely those bears are going to be shot as small bears, because somebody's out there looking for deer, bear pops up, he's got a bear license, he just pops him over.
Correct, sir. Yes, sir. And I know that isn't the case in all the bears harvested, but I think the likelihood of that happening in the fall is far greater than that happening in the spring. The other thing that in the spring, you get those dependent cubs, yearlings that haven't quite got kicked off the mom. They come to a bait, you're not going to shoot that bear. So whether that dependent is a female, the mom sure is. So that bear's walking off and going to go live. So you can be a little more choosy, whereas in the fall, that yearling could be gone, and then that yearling separates from the mom, and you don't have the dependent there with the mom to help better judge that that's a female, as well as you don't know it's hard to tell the sex of that dependent yearling bear. So I just think you can be a little choosier in the spring.
Certainly.
I guess I'm kind of having a hard time seeing how this is helping anything. You're talking about taking those 2 bears and putting them on the fall season?
No, sir. I was saying put them on the spring instead of the fall.
You just want to increase the mortality number.
Which they already have.
Okay.
Yeah, and they already have increased or proposed increasing it by 2 in the fall. I would rather see that increased by 2 in the spring.
And then if it gets to carry over into the fall.
And if it gets to carry, if it doesn't fill, we'll carry over into the fall.
Then thus it will be.
Well, can you go back to that slide? It's about slide number 12, page 12, or whatever it is.
He just thinks they have a better opportunity in the spring than they do in the fall.
And you're killing a lot of bears over there. Right. So what's that telling us? Give us a shorthand of all this.
President Little, Commissioner Anselmi, excuse me. So this happened to be one of our examples, and this is for Area 7 and 33 combined, but it's pretty similar because most of the harvest comes from Area 7 anyway. So Yeah, in the last 6 or 8 years, there has been an increase. Females have stayed fairly flat, but they're getting quite a few more males now than they had in the past. And so you do see that decrease in the proportion of adult males. So we're starting to get into them a little bit, but it's still pretty, the population's doing pretty well there in that area. And to your question about when things have been closing, in the regulation, the season closes May 31st, and the last 2 years it's closed May 27th, so about 4 days early. The year before that, it went all the way to the end, to the 31st. So that's the last 3-year cycle. That's when those spring seasons have closed. In the fall, the last 2 years it's closed mid-September. So that's the reason for increasing that fall by 2 was to extend that fall season, because in a lot of cases, he's correct that a lot of hunters in the fall tend to be more opportunistic. They have a bear tag while they're out deer or elk hunting, and so they run into a bear, and they happen to be a female because they're not as selective, and so that can close the season earlier. So the thought with the region was that adding 2 to the fall would help extend that fall season and give others an opportunity, into October as well, and not just shutting it down in mid-September.
So if I can throw a little summary in here, I think in a way, I appreciate what you've come here to say, Mr. McCarty, and I think in a way you're getting your increase in the spring by the fact that they're giving 2 to the fall, and that means that, the spring season doesn't, in other words, there are hunters in the spring season who can be selective, like you've talked about, because if they don't find the bear they want, they know there's still the fall chance, and they're not going to reach the mortality rate and not be able to have a fall season. So really, in some respects, by adding 2 to the fall, you kind of added 2 to the spring. Do you see how my mind is working?
I agree with you, yeah.
Commissioner Anselmi.
This is a little bit unrelated to this, but I asked a question at the meeting. We sell 4,500 licenses, I guess, and we kill 450 bears, like 1 to 10. And my question was, how many are killed, do we know, harvested over bait, and how many are harvested like opportunistically, is there any?
Madam President, Commissioner Anselmi, we do have that information. I don't have it here in front of me, but it tends to be the vast majority of spring bears are taken over bait, and in fall it's a lower percentage. People still bait in the fall, but it tends to be more around that 50-50, as opposed to in the spring it's probably about 90% bears taken over bait in spring.
Interesting.
Okay, so then, boy, this numbers game. So you harvest 450 bears. How many are killed in the spring, and how many are harvested in the fall?
Commissioner Anselmi, that tends to vary depending on the year. We have really poor food years. A lot of the time, the fall season will have more bears taken, but in a normal food year where there's natural foods available in the fall, bears aren't as vulnerable, and so generally speaking, spring tends to be where we get most of our harvest, but every once in a while we'll have a fall that spikes up, and so we get more of our bears taken in the spring generally than in the fall.
Would anybody hazard a guess, like is it 50-50, 50% are taken over bait, and 60-40, 70-30, or is that like you say, there's different years and there's different patterns, but just...
Commissioner Anselmi, generally, annually, I would say that it's probably more than half are taken over baits statewide. It tends to be more in the spring, and more of those spring bears are taken over bait. So we certainly have the data available, just not right here in front of me at the moment.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any more questions for Mr. McCarty while we have him up here? No, then thank you very much for your time today. And we have another gentleman, Joe Condelis. I knew I was going to butcher that. I'm so sorry. And he is with the Yellowstone Country Bear Hunters.
Yes, thank you, Madam President, Deputy Director, fellow commissioners. I first want to thank the commission and the department for allowing the sportsmen and women of this state to be a part of the process. We just have a few comments concerning the new regulations and some thoughts for the future for the commission maybe to consider. Generally speaking, we feel the current process is a good one with bait registrations. The proposed change to bait placement and coordinates is one that we approve of as a group. It has a potential to open up new sites and increase hunter opportunity and potentially increase hunter recruitment into the sport of bear hunting. We have greatly appreciated being a part of the season setting and regulation change process over the last 6 years. Our hope is to increase awareness in the bear hunting community so we can get more involved sportsmen in this process. As you guys seen, I think it was pretty low on the attended meetings and the comments. So we're working to try and get that better sportsman representation for future meetings coming forward. Just a couple things for the future that we would like to see. We've had several comments on quick fall seasons and lack of opportunity in the fall for dedicated bear hunters who maybe don't harvest in the spring but do want to have that opportunity in the fall, particularly in the bighorns. We get a lot of comments for that area as several of the seasons there in 1 and 2 close very quickly in the fall. So there's a growing concern over lack of opportunity, and as we get more sportsmen into the sport and obviously we increase bears, we're going to have kind of a quicker seasons and the quotas are going to close quicker. So we're hoping that with studies like Dan did in the Grays River and some of the collar studies they've done, that we can get more of those studies done throughout the state to get a better idea on bear population to possibly increase quotas and maybe some areas lower quotas, but to provide more opportunity in the fall and the spring for sportsmen to go out there and harvest a bear if that's what they choose to do. That's basically our comment as a group. So on behalf of our association and its members, I want to thank you guys for your time and all that you do for the sportsmen and women of Wyoming.
Thank you very much. Questions? Thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate any public comments. All right. The department like to make their final statement before we entertain this?
Madam President, members of the commission, we think the proposal stands and we support the proposal as written.
Thank you. Commissioners, any discussion?
Well, Madam President, I'm ready to make a motion. Unless
Please do so.
I'll second it.
Oh, he hasn't.
Well,
we gotta let him make it first.
I'll second what you're gonna say then.
He's still talking down there.
slow down, cowboy. Whoa, big fella.
You were ready. Good for you.
I was ready.
Madam President, I would move that we approve the changes to Chapter 3 with the statement that I think that with Mr. McCarty's input, I think any changes that maybe he was proposing, I'm sure that Dr. Thompson and Mr. Bjornley have made note of that, and I think that if there is changes that need to be made in those areas, I think that you can come back with those. You could come back with them next year, I guess. You don't have to wait 3 years. So I think I would leave it at that based on what's been proposed, and that's what I would recommend as a motion, that we approve Chapter 3 as it was presented, with Mr. McCarty's comments duly noted, I think. So
I think that's a good way to put it.
I'll second that long proposal.
Awesome. Sherry, if I might summarize and repeat. So Commissioner Clouda has made a motion to accept the department's recommended changes to Chapter 3 with the due notation, which I see Doug writing, that Mr. McCarty's comments be considered, and we do have season setting. They do have season setting in April. They could make those changes then as well if need be. And it was seconded by Commissioner Price. Is there any discussion?
I just want to see I'm going to miss these guys.
So basically, if there's going to be some adjustments, say Dan and Dan, decide that they do want to take in consideration this division of section 7 and maybe adjustment on there, that'll be up in the next season setting meeting.
What?
Madam
Did
President.
you hear what I said, or am I just talking into my?
Yeah, Madam President and Commissioner Price, may I suggest that the regions just take a look at harvest distribution across the landscape there and evaluate with recommendations from large carnivore section on where that harvest is occurring, and then take into consideration Mr. McCarthy's comments. And if something is warrants a change, they could come back to you. I would suggest after the next season cycle, not 3 years, but after a spring fall cycle, and they can evaluate kind of where they're at.
Okay. Does this interrupt our 3-year cycle thing?
Well, it would, but it'll give the region some time to be a little bit more responsive to our public's concerns, and give us some time to evaluate the current proposal and where that distribution of harvest occurs. Yeah.
Madam President, members of the Commission, Deputy Director, we do have a proposal for a change in this area, so we'd also like to look at what potential changes that would incur with harvest and black bears. So because we already have a proposal change in that area to increase it by 2 in the fall, we also want to evaluate that before making an additional change. But obviously we'll talk with Mr. McCarty, and we need to talk more with the regions because this didn't come up during the public comment process, and so we all heard it very loud and clear, and it's something we'll definitely look at.
Thanks, Dan. And also, oh, I'm sorry, were you not done?
The reason the reason I ask is, see, we won't do the season setting won't be done until July, if I'm right.
April.
What? For July meeting we set seasons.
April.
April? Okay, April, you're right.
No, that's for,
That's big game.
yeah,
Oh,
that's
big
for,
game, yeah.
Okay.
so this one is being
Oh,
set.
so it is.
This is there. Okay,
Correct.
Yes.
I'm comfortable with the motion you made.
Yeah. So I'm hoping you'll give some consideration to the comments that I made in regard to the southern bighorns as well.
Sure.
All right, thank you. We do have a motion. Is there any further discussion? If not, then I would, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. Motion carries.
Madam President?
Yes, Commissioner Anselmi.
And I just wanted to thank Mr. Bjornley. I remember that meeting when we talked about the Grays River, and that turned into that was kind of wild. And I appreciate you going out and doing those hair studies and all that. I mean, that's very proactive. So we've got some science to tell us what's going on up there, because it was a little bit unknown. But appreciate your work on doing all that on that.
Thank you, Commissioner Anselmi.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. All right, moving on. We have Brian DeBolt. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr.
okay.
Edberg. I did not realize you were
That's okay.
being interrupted.
Madam President, Commissioners, Deputy Director Kennedy, our next presenter will be Brian DeBolt, our large carnivore conflict coordinator, and Brian will give you the annual update on the 2016 large carnivore conflict summary. But I also want to note that I made it up here today without tripping. So that's a milestone.
There's time left.
Now you got to get back. I'm going to try to get back. Brian?
You're disappointing us, Scott.
Thank you. Madam President, Commissioners, Deputy Director Kennedy, appreciate you having me up here. As Scott said, this is just an annual update. Pretty short and sweet, I hope. It's after lunch. They always throw me after lunch. It's hot. Everybody's ready to fall asleep. So we can keep this interactive if you want.
Sometimes we do go to sleep.
Yeah, so anyway, I'm just going to give you an annual update. You can go ahead and throw the first video if you want. Of our large carnivore conflicts that we document in the state of Wyoming on an annual basis. So, as you know, large carnivores are black bears, grizzly bears, mountain lions, and wolves in the trophy game area within the state. And a conflict, it's a bona fide property damage or an animal being killed. It's more than a routine sighting or, you know, a interaction between, you know, a human and a mountain lion, for example, that's just benign and doesn't result in actual damage. And the way we document that is through an investigation process, of course. You know, a bear that wanders through a campground in a remote area is not necessarily a conflict, but we investigate that and find a camper such as this that's been torn into. Now that's a conflict. Okay, that was a bear trying to get into a camper there. That one was up in the Cody country. Where was that? Grass Creek, I believe, is where that was. We actually thought it was one of our new employees' campers, but no, it turns out it was another fella, so that was pretty good.
Was he in the trailer?
Yeah, that was a grizzly bear that tore into that trailer. They'd been left for some time, so yeah, they can be quite destructive. Obviously, a bear like this, I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent, but we feel, you know, is probably a bear that's got a food reward in and around, you know, humans or a campsite or a developed area before to become this bold and this aggressive in its attempt to get some sort of food. Most bears that haven't received that type of food reward, haven't become food conditioned, aren't that bold around people, maybe will sniff around and move on. But this is a bear that's, again, kind of crossed that boundary before. So we do investigate every single report that we can. So the conflicts that we do document, it's a known minimum. These are conflicts, again, that are real, that aren't just general reports from the public. They've been investigated and confirmed that something has actually happened. So what are those numbers? Well, 517 is what we documented throughout the whole state, through all those species, through every game and fish region. You can see most of these conflicts occur with grizzly bears. That's in the northwest corner of the state, followed by wolf conflicts. I'll get into each one of these a little more specific, but you can kind of see your respective regions, your areas of responsibility, where we deal with those conflicts. So, grizzly bear conflicts, we had 223. Most of those related to bears killing cattle. That's pretty common on an annual basis. The next one is garbage. Most of it's unsecured garbage. Most of northwest Wyoming, we've worked real diligently, including the land management agencies and the publics and outfitters, to secure simply garbage. And so we don't have very many, but those bears that do, grizzly bears that do get into garbage, it's usually because it's unsecured. And yeah, there's a video you can play there. So I don't know if you can hear it, doesn't matter, but it's not a gunshot towards the end. It's the door slamming if you do hear it. And forgive my amateur videography skills or photography skills. And this is from the security of the vehicle. I'm not outside, the window's up. So anyway, just releasing a bear. Figure it might be a appropriate video talking about management actions with bears. And bears react quite differently. Sometimes they'll charge a truck. Sometimes they'll slap the trailer when they come out. Total variety of behavior, reactions from a bear once they've been transported halfway across the state and coming out of anesthesia, different things. They've been reversed. And obviously this one's real mellow. He just wants to go on his way, get out of there.
So what'd you do with that bear? You put a tag on a collar, or what did you do?
Yeah, radio collar, ear tags, pit tag, lip tattoo. Take other biological samples, tooth, hair, tissue. So we really work them over, and so we can track them into the future, identify them later, and again, have those biological samples, DNA and whatnot, for future identification if we need it.
Oh, Commissioner Anselmi.
How many bears, grizzly bears, do you got tagged and tattooed? Or is that...
Boy, right now, we have around 80, 82, I believe, bears, what we consider online. That's in the whole ecosystem. Yellowstone, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming. About 80 bears, maybe 82, I think, is what we have online right now. currently wearing radio collars that we actively track.
So do the 3 states, do you all 3 share, all on the same database or whatever? Or, I mean, they know all 82, Idaho and...
President Little, Commissioner Anselmi, yes. All the grizzly bear data right now is housed kind of in one area. So the whole ecosystem of bears considered one population. All the demographic monitoring, everything goes through the interagency grizzly bear study team, houses all that data, and it's all pooled together. And it's actually a pretty good system to do it that way. Yeah. So we had 40 different captures of 39 individual bears. Basically, we caught one bear twice. It was actually that bear that you just watched being released. So relocated 16 bears. 21 of those bears were removed. And then on site was bears that were basically non-target captures during a conflict situation, so they were just released on site.
So my question would be, and you didn't show propensity there, but how many times would you, if you got to 3 times, okay, like that bear you'd caught twice, and you're catching him, I assume, because he's caused some trouble. So if he gets to 3, do you make another consideration on how to deal with it?
So the decision on what to do with a bear, and this is good. If I get off on too much of a tangent, let me know. But the decision of what to do in any conflict situation is dependent on a lot of factors. Ideally, our last resort is to catch a bear, for example, in this case. We want to secure the attractant first and foremost. If it's a bear getting into bird seed, okay, if we can just either get rid of the bird feeders, if it's getting into horse grain, if we can store that horse grain properly, if we can secure that attractant and prevent that conflict from happening again, that's number one, okay? Of course, education starts before that. Hopefully people never leave any of that stuff out, never leave those attractants available to a critter, and we don't have the conflict in the first place. But we know that that doesn't occur. So prevention is the big one, and then deterrence. If we can give a landowner some rubber bullets from a bear just kind of hanging around, and he can maybe thump that bear, or cracker shells, scare that bear off, deter it from coming back, that's another win, okay? If it escalates to the point where, we had to maybe put up an electric fence, whether it's around beehives or a grain shed or a, garbage area, that's another deterrence that we can do. If it escalates to the point where, bear's got a significant food reward, exhibiting that bold behavior where it warrants being captured, then we'll set a trap. And then we deal with that. Once we trap a bear and get it caught, again, there's a whole nother host of factors involved in what do we do, whether it's relocation or removal. And there's no standard 3 strikes, you're out. A bear could frankly be removed after 1 capture if it's serious enough and it's a threat to human safety. Maybe no suitable relocation sites. You consider the age, sex, conflict history of that bear that is captured. The location, the severity of the conflict that it was involved in the first place. All these things come into play when you determine what do you do with the bear. And a removal isn't necessarily lethal removal. It could be a live removal. Doesn't happen that often, but if the bear is placed into a sanctuary or a zoo or something of that nature, they're removed from the population, so it's considered a removal. They're not coming back. It's considered a mortality, in data terms. So, yeah, there's no set guidelines on exactly what we do. They're guidelines. There's no set.
Hey, one important point, Madam President, that I want to make here is that our folks have dealt with these issues and deal with the conflicts and kind of the different variables that are considered in how to handle conflict situations. But at the end of the day, we don't make that decision. That decision's made by the Fish and Wildlife Service because this is an endangered species, and so we make a recommendation to them, and they make a final approval.
Okay.
Madam President, may I?
Yes. Thank you. Commissioner Ryle.
Ryan, it's good to know this. It's really good to know this because I always assume that when there was a problem bear, one complaint, there was a trap set. And it seems to me like we can tell the public that we take every precaution we can to get rid of the attractant, because something's causing that bear to come in. So
Yes,
it's
President
safely
Little,
done. I mean, on
Commissioner
behalf of
Rail,
the bear.
that's exactly right. We do everything we can to not have to set a trap. You know, if we can prevent those conflicts from occurring, then we're far better off. And then again, yeah, the decision to what to ultimately do with the grizzly bear, for example, Mr. Nesbitt's exactly right. We can only make a recommendation. The ultimate decision is up to the Fish and Wildlife Service. So, okay. So as far as mortalities go with grizzly bears this year, we documented 36 in the state of Wyoming. Again, 21 of those were management removals. 7 of those are currently under investigation. You can use your imagination as to those. 4 vehicle strikes, which is kind of high this year. 3 drownings, I'll talk about those in a minute. And then 1 natural, which is the one you're looking at right there. This bear was killed by another bear. So these mortalities, again, 18 of those occurred inside the demographic monitoring area. 18 of those occurred outside that demographic monitoring area, which you can see is kind of the blue line there. And so of those 18 that occurred outside, 3 of them were drownings, 1 was a vehicle strike, and 14 of those 21 management removals occurred outside of, suitable bear habitat is what that is. We get bears expanding outside suitable bear habitat, outside areas that they've historically occupied. And we're catching a lot of those bears. Again, we weigh in all those factors I just talked about, and the majority of removals that we had were from outside suitable bear habitat.
Commissioner Price.
Drowning, how do they just get their cell phone?
Can you shelf that for just 2 seconds, and I'll get to it?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Black bear conflicts, 123 black bear conflicts. Most of those, again, associated with garbage. Bears are good at finding garbage. They love it. We hate it. It's garbage to us, but it's a significant food resource for them. It's easy to find. It's easy to smell, and it's actually quite nutritious for them. From a nutritional standpoint, it's good for them. Property damage, again, bears, scratching on vehicles, tearing screens, homes, residences, that type of stuff, and on down the list there. What did we do with those bears? Again, we captured 19 bears. We relocated 8, removed 11 of them. This cub you're actually looking at right here was a bear that just wandered into Du Bois last January, about a year ago. It ended up going to the zoo, so it was a live removal. Yeah.
Hey, quick question, and Owen is going to come up again. So actually in the previous slide, so when so like you get to sheep and you say 13. So just an FYI, I assume that is the number of actual conflicts. That's not the number of deer or sheep.
That's a great question, President Little. So a sheep conflict, a bear can go in and kill, let's say 5, 6, 10 sheep
25.
in one night. Okay? That's
I'm just saying
conflict.
we've had that happen. Black
Absolutely.
bears come in and lay down.
Yeah, they kind of get into a little killing spree, and they may just start swatting and killing. And so that'd be one conflict.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
so if they came back a second night, killed another dozen, that would be a second conflict. Okay. So 13 individual conflicts, but that doesn't necessarily reflect the actual number of sheep that may have been killed.
Well, what I've been told, I said, my God, why would they kill that many? And they're all right there. I mean, you could count them all. And they said, well, they like to eat rotten meat, so they just figure they'll lay them out, and it'll reach to the delectability that they're looking for, I guess, in a couple days.
Yeah, that's correct, President Little. It's they're really not wasteful. They will come back and feed as much and as often as they can on whatever they've taken the effort to kill. Okay, mountain lion conflicts. This year was pretty normal compared to other years, 15. Most of them are typically related to sheep, but this year we had 5 what we call an animal death, and that's a mountain lion death. I think one was a mountain lion chasing horses, which was legally taken. You know, you can protect your property in the state of Wyoming. A couple bears on, or excuse me, a couple mountain lions on porches that people removed. Another one was, you know, an aggressive charge in a residential area. Person took that lion, all legal ways to remove a mountain lion. We had kind of a significantly high number of those this year, but you can see on down the list again, most of them are, you know, bears killing sheep or poultry or that type of thing. So what did we do? We only actually captured 2 mountain lions this year. One killed a rooster, one killed 4 goats. We removed the one that killed the 4 goats, and we relocated the one that killed the rooster. So usually pretty small number of mountain lion conflicts on an annual basis. Wolf conflicts, again, we have very limited response and really no jurisdiction whatsoever with wolves now that they're on the back on the endangered species list. But we do respond to reports of wolf depredations to livestock in the trophy game area, and we responded to 156 of those this year. If for nothing else, it's for compensation purposes. Again, we have no management authority whatsoever. Most of those were related to cattle. And the reason this number is an approximate is frankly, I just asked the Fish and Wildlife Service how many wolves they removed this year, and they said, geez, we haven't got our numbers together, but it's right at 120. And that's what they've been reporting to the animal or the predator board meetings and whatnot in the county. So that's an approximation from them. It had nothing to do with us. So, but it is significantly more than it has been in previous years.
That's just in Wyoming?
Yes.
Really?
Yep. And President Little, Commissioner Culver, that's not totally unexpected that we're seeing an increase in that. You know, these wolves packs have gone unhunted, virtually uncontrolled for several years now. Pack numbers are getting quite large, expanding their distribution. So that it just, yeah, it's a numbers game. You're just going to see more of that occur. So what does that cost us? Again, like I said, a lot of what we do is totally in response to compensation. You can see the breakdown of grizzly bear, black bear, mountain lion, and wolf. And this is, again, for the fiscal year. We're slightly off. The conflicts that I'm reporting are for a calendar year. This is for last fiscal year. You know, it's approximately $920,000 were paid out in damage claims for those 4 species last fiscal year. But the biggest part of our program, as always, besides responding to these conflicts, when those calls come in, is the outreach that we do, trying to prevent these conflicts. And it's so far-reaching, everything from talking to, you know, to little kids and school groups and our statewide large carnivore program. Here's Dusty Lassiter, our I&E coordinator, showing kids how to use bear spray. That's inert bear spray with a little target over there. This was in bags. Robin's not here. She did a great job with that. That was pretty neat. You know, we've even gone like to Louisiana, for example, try to teach some of them. Their BART is Bear Attack Response Team. You know, our program is recognized not only nationally but internationally. Wyoming does a really good job. We appreciate the support that we have, not only from our administration and the commission. Our regional folks are tremendous. I threw this slide in here. This is pretty neat. So we have a booth, living with bears and whatnot, living with large carnivores. This is in Lander, and you know, people like us, and of course the rodeo girls come by and get their pictures taken with the bear skull, and that's all neat stuff. But here's a special needs person giving our local game warden Brady Fruit a big hug, and that's just kind of a neat picture, you know, and that says a lot. So a lot of people hate us just because we deal with bears and wolves, but a lot of people love us, and we are very well respected because of everything we do. Internally as well, we do a lot of training. This year was in Cody. Chris Queen, that bottom right picture is Chris Queen's. He's a game warden up there in Powell. That's his son pretending that he was attacked by a mountain lion laying there. But our predator attack team training that we did this year went really well. And again, we're getting some national recognition for that. Our Park County, and these are just a few of the things that we do. I wanted to highlight a few of them. Our Park County Carcass Management Program is still going strong. It's very successful. We're removing carcasses that may attract grizzly bears or wolves, for example, down into near calving areas, for example, calving pastures around developed areas. It works really well. We remove that attractant, and that's funded by the Park County Predator Board right now. It's done real well to reduce some conflict, some of that preventive management that we're doing. Other prevention efforts, again, electric fencing, working with bee yards, trying to prevent damage that occurs there. Garbage, attractant storage is big to prevent conflicts. So trends and issues here, President Little and Commissioner Price. This is where we had the 3 drownings occur with grizzly bears. This is the canal there in Park County. Part of it is just this big tubed canal. The other, long portions of it are this cement-sided. And I'm talking about large carnivores, and grizzly bear deaths is one of them. 3 grizzly bears drowning. I guess is a point of interest. It's not overly significant in any way, but that's what we're talking about. Cattle die in this thing. Deer, elk, antelope. A young woman died in this canal, drowned this year. So many things are subject to it. But this is what we were dealing with here. Basically, the irrigation district, help us dig 3 grizzly bears out of this canal that, succumbed to drowning. So quite an interesting, phenomenon that happened right there. And I think it's an anomaly this year. I doubt it's going to be something long-term we're going to see.
That was up at Hart Mountain, wasn't it?
Yes, sir.
President Little, was that one event or 3 different events with the bear drowning?
President Little, Commissioner Culver, that was 3 different events this summer. So bears expanding eastward, out of that Clark, Beartooth country, into that canal, and just, and we have significant number of bears showing up in different regions of the state, or mountain lions in one chunk of the state for whatever reason. We don't have a crystal ball. We can't tell for sure. So like I said, I think this is an anomaly. We just happen to kind of see this movement of bears this particular year. I don't see it being significant long term.
You don't? I mean, you don't see them moving eastward, Brian?
I do. I don't see drowning in the Hart Mountain Canal being a significant issue over time, but the expansion of bears in general, absolutely. That's something we're dealing with for sure. Bears in general, we're dealing with all sorts of new kinds of conflicts. We got a guy in the basin that had a lot of issues this year with not this particular site, but bears were messing with the floats, in his watering. They think there were toys in there, and they'd go in there and tear those things up. And, when you have 50, 60 of these spread across the landscape to water your livestock, that can be pretty significant trying to monitor and repair those things. So here's a trap set actually at Teton Village Ski Resort. It's kind of the cement jungle, I think is what Supervisor Hovengay termed this thing. We're dealing with conflicts that we just haven't in the past. Here's another real unique thing we dealt with this year. So this is a grain tunnel. And Luke called me and he's like, man, we got 4 or 5 bears in a grain tunnel. And I said, well, what is a grain tunnel? So he sent me this picture. He goes, it's a great big tunnel. You can drive in it and they store grain in it. And anyway, I don't know if you can see within the flashlight there, but there's 2 adult male grizzly bears right there. And they were in this grain tunnel fighting, and they got them both darted. And anyway, we relocated them out of there. But just another example of we're dealing with this evolution of conflicts as bears expand into these areas that they haven't occupied for a long time. And it's going to take new methods. We're going to have to be kind of forward thinking on what to do with these bears and how to prevent these type of conflicts and whatnot. In unsuitable habitat. It really is. There's not a tree for miles. This is sagebrush, alkali soil for miles. I mean, you're lucky to find a willow bush in a small ephemeral stream. That's west of Cody.
And who was the poor seasonal you made walk in there and dart those bears?
I was sitting here thinking why none of us commissioners have ever helped you with the bear removal somewhere. I think we're a bunch of cowards.
Yeah.
No,
Currently
I
accepting
wouldn't.
applications, so. So it takes a lot of vigilance to deal with this evolution of conflicts and what we're doing. And it's not just grizzly bears. That seems to take kind of a high focus, but some of it's a little, frankly, neater for you folks, you know, after lunch and when it's hot and keeps you awake. But all sorts of large carnivores, we're dealing with unique and interesting types of conflicts that are making us have to think outside the box. But, you know, I think maintaining a well-staffed large carnivore section and regional folks to have an immediate response to these conflicts works well for us. Preemptive solutions are key. Having a good, close working relationship with livestock producers and property owners and county commissioners is great. Our outreach and education has just, again, served us so well. And it's really a team effort to do this. Like I mentioned before, the regions are a tremendous resource for us. They help us and support us very, very well. You know, help our large carnivore section out. And the support that we have from the administration and you as the commissioners has just been fantastic. So that's all I have for you today. There's another little just short video for you to watch. And I'd be glad to take any questions if you have.
What was that squeeze sheet?
Commissioner Little. Oh.
What's that instation?
Oh, that was just a calf that had been bit by a grizzly bear that was still alive, and so we were flushing that wound.
What the hell's he doing?
Well,
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? No.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you very much.
Thank
That was
you.
a great presentation. Really appreciate it. Super. All right, we are going to take a 10-minute break or 8-minute break or so. Let's come back. Wait a minute, that clock's off. Let's come back at 3:15. Not that clock. Yeah, mine is 3:06. Mr. Nesbitt.
Madam President, Deputy Director Kennedy, members of the commission. Next we have, I think you probably remember last year we did a kind of a look back on the hunting season, and I think this is about a 7 or an 8 minute video with some music set to it. And what we do is we ask all of our field folks to send B, I think most of you have met B. She's my administrative assistant. We have our folks from the field send hunting season photos and cool wildlife photos in, and then we put them together for all of you for this little presentation. Our game warden here in Cheyenne, Kristen Devanin. Kristen's right back here. Kristen and B worked really hard on putting this thing together, and anyway, I hope you enjoy it. The other thing we'll do with it is we send this out to all of our regions too, and the regions that have a TV screen in the office, they'll play this thing on that TV screen so the public has an opportunity to see this too. And so with that, if you guys roll it and turn the lights down.
Thank you.
I've been waiting all year long for November to come along. Freezing rain and the chance of snow, and that bitter wind starts to blow.
Yeah, better.
That was last year's. Now we got this year's.
Oh, is he? Good. Oh, perfect.
Been waiting all year long for November to come along. Freezing rain and the chance of snow, and that bitter wind starts to blow. And with the bucks in run and a hard cold run and the pressure falling down, it's all lining up like the perfect storm. I got the perfect stand for a northwest wind and the moon is on the rise. This is gonna be one of those hunts to remember. Sweet November, sweet November, sweet November, sweet November. Leaves are turning, there's a chill in the air. Campfires are burning, we're gathered round in chairs. 3 generations of hunting in our veins, talking about what might happen on opening day. Where the man's calling for southwest winds, gonna have to change my plans. Guess I won't be hunting the power line. I'm moving to the boat seat stand. Sighted in my rifle, and she sure is shooting straight. But I'll meet up with the jitters, y'all. It's opening day. I've been working all summer and it's sure been hot. Tractor tore up, but I planted my plot. Deer trail running through there looks like a highway. I got my heart set on that drop time buck. There's plenty of room in the back of my truck. It's been a long year, but it's gonna be worth the wait. It's opening day. Came early and we chugged that coffee down. Headed to the stand with my little man and he didn't make a sound. Sat there till 9:15 and old drop time didn't show. Saw a couple of squirrels, a fat raccoon, a possum and a doe. Then out of the blue came a cow horn spike and my little boy started to shake. But he manned up and took his very first buck on opening day. I've been working all summer and it's sure been hot. Tractor tore up, but I planted my plot. Deer trail running through there looks like a highway. I got my heart set on that drop time buck. There's plenty of room in the back of my truck. It's been a long year, but it's gonna be worth the wait. It's opening day. It's gonna be worth the wait. It's finally opening day. You better get out your gun, clean it up good and get in the woods. It's opening day. Clock ringing, it's 4 a.m. Before the sun comes up, my day begins. Grab a thermos full of coffee, a gun, and I'm out the door. I've been waiting all summer for this time of year. Now I'm up in the stand, and I think I can hear a big old buck busting through the brush behind me. It's shotguns, camouflage, and 4x4s. Black powder smoke, gotta love the outdoors. Pull that arrow back and just let her sing. Yeah, 'cause it's all good, y'all. It's a hunting thing. Winter's summer's come and gone, springtime's here. Got a Boone and Crockett book on the wall from last year. Now I'm up in this holler getting down with my turkey call. We'll just call him up, hammerback, bring him on in. Got a picture to show my good friends and a story to pass down through to all of my kids. About shotguns, camouflage, and 4x4s. Bright powder smoke, gotta love the outdoors. Pull that arrow back and just let her sing. Yeah, 'cause it's all good, y'all. It's a hunting thing.
Very good. Thank you, ladies. That was wonderful.
When, Madam President?
Yes, Commissioner Clouda.
When do those have to be submitted if you know somebody that?
If you submit them to be by about middle December,
Okay.
we'll make sure they're in.
And they can be emailed down to B?
Yep.
Okay.
And for you, Commissioner Clouda, we will make an exception all the way to the end.
I know some kids.
You know some
Won't
people.
see any from me.
All right, Deputy Director Kennedy.
It's nice to be reminded. I know. That was pretty bad.
No, it was awesome. Madam President, members of the Commission. Our next agenda item, we're going to actually do things a little out of the order, I think. So this is, I'm not sure what number this is on the agenda. This is to discuss the draft legislation to implement the 2016 Constitutional Amendment A. So just by way of background for the Commission and a couple of the commissioners that haven't been involved as much as others, when the department went to present your FY17-18 Commission budget and our FY17 budget and our general fund budget on December 13th, there was some discussion at that JAC meeting regarding the legislation that we're going to talk about right now at this agenda item, which involves a potential change in the investment policy for certain non-permanent funds of the state. Your Game and Fish Trust Fund is an example of one of those funds. We coordinated together, the Director's Office and the Commission. LSO and JAC had asked as to whether or not the Commission wanted to be involved in the draft legislation at that time. We coordinated, we communicated back through LSO to JAC that the Commission was not prepared to be involved in that legislation yet. You wanted to have this discussion and actually get consensus from the Commission as a whole with respect to whether or not you move forward and be a part of the legislation and do in fact want to change the investment strategy for your trust fund corpus. Then House Appropriations, was that yesterday? Monday, House Appropriations, and I want to thank Commissioners Little, Price, and Culver for assisting the last couple of days, and Commissioner Culver and Price actually attended the House Appropriations discussion that we had. There was a lot of discussion and a lot of questions that took place on Monday, many of the same questions that you had. So at this point, we reported to House Appropriations that the Commission was going to have the discussion today and that we would report back after the Commission meeting. So House Appropriations is waiting to hear back from the Commission with respect to what you decide today. So that's kind of the background. We're lucky today to have the State Treasurer, Mark Gordon, here. If anybody can answer your questions regarding this draft legislation, it's the State Treasurer. So with that, Treasurer Gordon, it's all yours and Commission.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, members of the Commission, it's a delight to be here, and I don't know if I should accept the challenge in the last slide or not. I saw a warden looking out of his pickup with a spotting scope saying, "See you next year." Okay. In any event, it's a pleasure to be here today, and I thank you for this opportunity. Let me just step back a little bit. I don't know the familiarity of the entire Commission on sort of the history of this, and so I thought I would take a brief moment to just kind of describe the effort we went to try to get Amendment A passed, and then what we foresaw going forward. And then I've brought with me the state's chief investment officer, Patrick Fleming, and we can speak more directly to some of the particulars if that's your pleasure. You all probably know that last year we passed an amendment which allows the funds of the state that are not permanent funds by a 2/3 vote of both houses voting independently to be invested in some equity according to terms and conditions that are prescribed by the legislature. The vote for that was about 51%. And it's a valuable tool because what we've seen over the last several years, really since about 1981 or 2, the bond market has been on a kind of a tear. If you remember back to those days, we had interest rates that were quite high, 15, 16, 17%. Today we find them down, in the neighborhood of a little bit around 1. Now they've recently gone up to 2, and that is the problem, because the very fixed income securities that we rely on for safety and security and liquidity are the very things that are going to be challenged in an environment where interest rates are rising. And there's some factors to that, but that is a rule of thumb. So we had hoped a few years ago, with that possibility looming large, that we would be able to diversify assets and be able to have a more mixed kind of portfolio to be able to protect the funds a little bit better and maybe get a little bit better return. So fast forward to past passage, at the Joint Appropriations Committee in December, I believe it was, the question came up, what are you going to do about this? And I had taken the notion that we would pick a few funds that were really standard trust funds established that had boards that could think about them and make decisions about whether they wanted to take on the additional risk or not. I settled on 3 funds that I then wrote, so that'd be the Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust. I served on that board myself, and Bud and I had a conversation. He communicated it with his board and said they would take it up. I also spoke to the Cultural Resource Trust, a very similar trust fund established in the state agency pool. Renee Beauvais and Nancy Schiffer, who's a dear friend and has served as a chair of that. We talked about it a little bit. And then I also talked with Ruby Bebout about the Public TV Trust Fund. They're all fairly small trust funds. They all have some capacity to be able to take on a little bit of additional risk. So I wrote them a letter and said, here are the 3 things that we want you to communicate to us. First, are you interested in being part of this as a guinea pig? Second, can you give us a sense of what your liabilities are and what your liquidity needs are? And third, what is your appetite? This is the most important part. What is your appetite for taking risk in this endeavor? And we thought with the communication we would get back, we could establish a pool potentially that would have a kind of a common asset allocation. It wouldn't be trying to, rev up and try to get huge returns and take enormous amounts of risk. It was going to be a balanced portfolio with potential for maybe a little bit better return. The most important thing about that for us was the fact that we wanted to make sure that we took baby steps. These were funds that had, as I said, missions that could take on some of that risk. They were all intended to grow, and most importantly, they were probably not directly in a lot of people's radar screens. And the reason why we wanted to do that was because we anticipated there would be some speed bumps. There would be some things we'd have to work out, and we wanted to take then the interim between this year and next year to take the full breadth of that year to work with our Select Committee on Capital Finance and the Joint Appropriations Committee to see if there were other funds, such as yours, that could be put into this in this kind of an allocation, or if indeed there were other ways that we might want to approach it. So that was the way I went forward. When we got to the Joint Appropriations Committee, President Harshman recommended that the Game and Fish Trust Fund be included. Before that, Carrie and I had talked. I think you probably all have some recollection of that conversation, but I expressed to her, my conservative approach to wanting to make sure we got this right before we started putting a lot of funds in this. At that the House Joint Appropriations Committee meeting on Monday, a number of issues arose, and they're important. They're important to how we prosecute this bill going forward. There was, and I think this is a particular challenge in this particular piece of legislation. This legislation essentially puts you into a pool that you haven't had a chance to discuss or understand what it is that, we're going to try to be safe and careful and thoughtful about that, but we hadn't had the chance to talk to you, and I think it's important that that we communicate with you and you understand what the risks are involved and how we would go forward with managing those funds. So I'm glad to be here for that, and that's why Patrick's here. I think there is also a notion that one of the representatives, Representative Summers, was asking, which is, well, so what if the commission only wants to put 5% in this fund, and the rest of it they want to leave in the old fund? Can they do that? Now that's not the way we had envisioned it, and I think there's some problems with that. But to be honest with you, that's not contemplated in this bill. That's not prescribed one way or another, and that's one of those things that we wanted to take the year to understand. My particular, from an operational standpoint, I think it's simplest if we have a fund with a common asset allocation that is somewhat prescribed by the legislature, and that funds can join in that. We maintain the liquidity that's necessary for you to do whatever the mission is that you have to accomplish, that we also build in a bit of equity, which might have a little bit better return and might protect against a couple of other things, but that the whole fund be in that pool as opposed to the state agency pool. I get a little bit nervous, and I think it's probably a little bit complicated if we start asking the Wildlife Natural Resource Trust, the Game and Fish Commission, the Cultural Resource Trust to start making decisions about how much they want to have in this fund, and they don't, or they don't. And the reason I say that is twofold. One, if we start having different expectations on what this fund's meant to do, then we've kind of defeated the purpose of the fund, which is, we're going to try to have a thoughtful, conservative fund that is going to meet the broadest set of objectives that we can arrange. And two, it then puts back on you that fiduciary decision, which is really sort of what we're supposed to be doing. And I'm not saying it because I'm in any way got any sort of parochial notion about us being better or worse or anything else, but that then puts into your meetings perhaps somebody's fears that they've seen a report on the TV that morning and they suddenly think that, oh my gosh, we got to get out of the stock market this afternoon or something else. And so my view is that we want to build a system that you have some confidence in, that we can report to you regularly, and that the State Loan and Investment Board can work with you to make sure that the asset allocation makes the most sense. So that's just kind of the broad overview, and I'd be happy to stand for any questions. And as I say, Patrick's here and can talk to you a little bit more about the particulars.
So Treasurer Gordon, one of my questions would be, and this was something brought up by one of my fellow commissioners, that if we didn't get in now, would that reduce our potential of getting in later?
So, Madam Chair, that's a hard question to answer. What I can tell you is what my plan is. I have no idea if any of these funds or this pool concept is going to make it through. I don't know if it would pass on a majority vote, but the challenge of having a 2/3 vote in the House and a 2/3 vote in the Senate is certainly even higher obstacle. And that was one reason why I wanted to be really cautious about the funds that we introduced, so that people could say, these are appropriate guinea pigs. Let's see how it works. So let's assume that it does pass for some reason, and let's assume it passed in the form that we had thought about, which is really those 3 funds plus an internal fund that we manage. Then my view would be that the interim committee, that would most likely be the Select Committee on Capital Finance, which reports to the Joint Appropriations Committee, that committee would have then the course of the year to talk about not only whether the game and fish trusts could be part of that, but whether other funds ought to be part of that too. And there'd be appropriate long-term discussion about that, and you'd have the best chance you could of sort of crafting the program. We'd have the chance to make adjustments. My presumption would then be that the Joint Appropriations Committee, if they thought favorably about that, would then say, here's another group of funds that we're ready to launch. And if we were successful in the first one, I think the second one would be much more likely to pass. But again, and it was intended to be that. It was a very high hurdle to have 2/3 of both houses.
So when we're thinking about the timeline of this, and I was fortunate to be able to go to the Bankers Association meeting last night, and the speaker there was talking about, which for me, considering in the business that I do and the considerable loss to the book that I handle in insurance in this state over the last year and a half, this was such positive news just to hear that we may be on a linear plane for maybe 12 months and then see. So I guess my question would be, what would be the rush? I mean, in other words, there may not be that much to gain, and it might be a great time for you to be putting this all together. Number one, it's got to go through the legislature. After that, would I be correct in assuming then there'll be a degree of parameters having to be set out, which will also require a few months of work? I mean, we'd be able to sit back and see how that went.
Madam Chair, I think the point you make is a very good one. Let me just tell you a little bit about sort of the mechanics of how we'd have to do it, and let me turn it over a little bit to Patrick after that to just talk about the markets and what the opportunity cost might be. But just sort of the mechanics of how this goes forward. Let's say it passes, and let's say it gets signed by the governor on March 2nd. We then, on the 15th and 16th, and if it does pass and you're in it, I put this on your calendars, on the 15th and 16th of March, we're going to have a session where we're going to, for 2 days, walk through in an open session with all the members of the SLIB asset allocation. And we're going to look at what the efficient frontiers are, where we have the highest return for the lowest risk within the parameters that are set by the legislature and by you all, assuming that there's a straightforward communication between us. So on that, we'll have the chance to look through that and walk through that. Now, one of the problems with this bill is it says that those monies shall be placed in this new pool, and then it indicates that there's a 60%, may invest up to 60% in equities. If you are then in that pool, I think one of the other questions that's being asked is, well, if you're in that pool, what funds are going to have 90% and what funds are going to have 10%? I can tell you from our side, I don't want to run it that way. That's going to be ridiculous. I want to run it like this is this pool, this is the asset allocation, everybody that participates in it's going to have this asset allocation, this return characteristic. So I think one of the corrections that could be made in the bill is may elect to be in this new pool. But anyway, we're going to go through that work session to set the asset allocations, and would include this new pool if it passes. Then we would move to April, is it 6th or April 6th, when the State Loan and Investment Board would then pass on the policy statement and the asset allocation that would then be able to be put into effect. So we have up till April, and then it would take, presuming we're going to find somebody to run the allocation and so on, that takes another couple of months because we'd have to go out for an RFP, select managers, be able to bring those people on house. This is just the way big organizations and governments do things. We're not as nimble as we'd like to be. So we're probably talking sometime midsummer-ish before we'd really be ready to go. And then, of course, the other characteristic, which I'll let Patrick talk about, is just what the timing is. There is, at this point, just my own view, and then I'll let the more smart guy talk about it. But my own view is right now, we've just come off several record days on the equity markets, the highest they've ever been. And I'm a cowman, so I know how to buy high and sell low, and that does not work well. So we are probably going to be very prudent in how we deploy this over time. So let me turn it over if that's all right.
Yes, thank you very much. Welcome, Mr. Fleming.
Oh, thank you, Madam President, members of the Commission. My name is Patrick Fleming. I'm the Chief Investment Officer for the Treasurer's Office. One, I would like to just talk a little bit about when we're looking at this, and Treasurer used words that, the guinea pig and so forth. What he was really, on the conservative nature of what we're talking about, yes, it would be a trial run, but this is still, funds that we take very, very seriously, and this is a very large chunk of the amount of money that many of these entities would be able to invest in. So from a trial component, yes, but when people talk about going into equities and the 60% equities, we are both very leery of market valuations. Mark alluded to the short-term nature of where the funds are, or the valuation would be, but even on a long-term valuation, there's many different metrics that we look at, and we're overvalued anywhere from 74 to 84% on some of the metrics that we use on historical basis. So going into an equity market in a 60% manner right now, an S&P 500 type of investment, we would be very leery of doing anything like that. But the other component that a lot of people don't look at is there are other things that are considered equities that we cannot do right now. So right now, the bond market and what you're invested in currently has a yield of about 2.5%. And we know fixed income is very easy to value, and that's a very low value for a longer term fund when you have these very long-term liabilities. So having something else in there that would be more on what Mark alluded to on the efficient frontier, to have a little bit more exposure to get a bit higher yield. An example would be like a preferred stock. It's still an equity. It has a higher yield. It's much more conservative than an equity, but you get it's more bond-esque in its investment. So when we're looking at this, there are many different opportunities that you're not allowed to go into at this time that would then be on the table that we could look at. A master limited partnership, for instance, they're yielding 7 or 8%. You could take a portfolio of many of these different investments that would then allow you to get possibly a higher investment than you're getting now. It's not possibly, you would, with a slight amount of risk, but we're not talking about going into a 60% S&P fund and 40% bonds. So with that, the value, just what we're looking at right now, so you understand what most of the market pundits or Wall Streeters are saying, the bond market is very easy. The next 10-year forecast is going to be around 2.5% if you invested in 10-year security. The S&P or U.S. equities, large cap equities, are somewhere around 5%. So we're in a much lower expectations of what you can look for. But there's other things that we could do that would lower the risk and potentially get something better than this 2.5%. And that's what we're talking about, and hopefully would be what we would structure during this asset allocation meeting with the SLIB board in March. Do you have any questions?
But, Commissioner Price.
I have a number of questions. I guess and maybe you can explain this, but as I understand it, we have sitting in there the Game and Fish Fund, plus these others that you named on that. Now, do you envision taking those funds, putting them together proportionally according to how much goes in, and then investing those funds in various equities, bonds, and stuff like that on a proportional basis? In other words, you might have, I think you mentioned now, high risk, moderate risk, low risk area. And so let's just say, I'm just going to pick a couple of things. Let's say the Game and Fish and the Natural Trust Fund. And that's a big fund. We're a relatively small fund compared to that. But let's just say we have 10%, they have 90% on that. So if you invest this, you'd be, our 10%, would it go in evenly with the 90, there? In other words, take a slice out of both of them in proportion to how much they were and put in a particular category.
So let me back up for a second. When I spoke the other day, I was really talking about what I foresaw as an eventual build out on the whole program, which would be that you would have the state agency pool. You might have a more liquid, less aggressive fund, which is really kind of the one we're talking about now. And then eventually you might have one that was more aggressive, more intended for growth, because we do have a couple of trust funds that really need to grow and really don't have many things that are there. They're very small, but for the near term, kind of in the keep it simple kind of approach, it was basically looking at one pool of funds and another pool of funds, and probably managing them roughly mechanically roughly the same between the two. So in the state agency pool, you participate along with more than 350 other funds proportionally. So if there's a gain, you get a proportional measure of that gain. If there's a loss, unhappily, you get a proportional measure of that loss. And we would look at setting that up to be roughly the same in the other pool. And the reason for that is because we would want to take the most conservative approach, and I say that cautiously because that's not, we're going to have lots of bonds. It means that we're going to have a very balanced portfolio. So we would make sure that there was first safety and security, and then we would be able maybe to get a little bit better return. A little hard to say that we're going to get great returns, so I don't want to say that. But your fund, the way I had envisioned it, would be entirely in that pool with those characteristics. So if there was the Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust and the Game and Fish Trust and the Cultural Resource Trust, they would all be participating exactly the same. And proportional gains, proportional losses would be handled across those. I think there is a little bit of confusion in the members of the committee who are suggesting that one fund might have a very high allocation to equities and one fund might have a very low allocation.
That's what I heard day before yesterday. I'm going to follow up a question.
You're fine. You have the floor.
Okay. If we say that it goes in, we have this proportional fund that's proportioned, but it's all one fund, will be handled the same. If you decide to invest in a particular area, then maybe you invest that. Everybody will go in. If you take 10% of this fund, decide to go into a certain category, then 10% of everybody's proportion will go into that category as a unit. That's fine. One of the things I have a question of is these funds that we have in the fund are basically in, let's say, bond type things, and a lot of those bonds have a life.
Mhm.
to them. So you can't just say, we're gonna invest so much without letting some of those bonds mature, or you're gonna have to sell them at a discount to get money out of them to, you know, to put into a particular area. How will you handle that?
M&A, sorry.
Madam President, Mr. Chairman, or Commissioner, how that works is the bonds that we have currently are predominantly spread across many different managers. So we don't physically own the bonds. We have a small internal portfolio, which is approximately $1 billion. Part of that would be in the SAP. But what happens on that when you're doing a transaction like that, then you would liquidate a fund manager. You do not mature the bonds, but you would liquidate the manager or redeem some of the bonds that they are holding. And so the majority of the bonds that we hold right now in the state agency pool are involved. It's what's called a Barclay Aggregate Index. And the vast majority of the bonds are U.S. Treasuries, agencies of the U.S. government, mortgage-backed securities, and investment-grade corporate bonds. The liquidity in that is very easy, and the bid-offer spread is fairly tight. So the event, like if you yourself sold a personal bond, you might take a hit of 1 or 2% on doing that. Here we're talking about a few basis points. So that would not be a significant consideration or worry about in liquidating or changing from one asset class to another.
One asset category to move that value to another, but you're only going to get a point or two rather than a higher, because an individual has to take a fairly sharp cut, so a discount on that to liquidate a bond or anything like that.
Yes, Madam President, Commissioner, that is correct. What we're looking at doing something similar right now, because the state agency pool that you're in right now, we are currently looking to reduce some of the risk exposure in that because of the structure of the fund. As I alluded to before, the majority of the bonds are in Barclay aggregate indexed funds, and as the rates have gone down, the duration or risk element has gone up. So the risk of this portfolio is actually higher. So we're looking to reduce that risk for everyone. And some of the costs that I've had are 1 to 2 basis points as opposed to 100 to 200 basis points that you yourself would have to pay as an individual. So it's a fraction of the cost to do this transaction.
Okay, that's a question. Okay, you've answered that question. Thank you. I'll wait and see if there's any more.
Commissioner Culver, do you have some questions?
I do. And I'm not sure which one of you want to answer this, but so I originally assumed that you would have several pools as far as level of risk. But the way you're talking, you're going to only have one, at least for the short term, you will only have one pool as far as a level of risk. And then eventually that might move to 2 or 3 or.
Madam Chairman, Commissioner Culver, that functionally, the way the amendment was written, any fund that is given this ability has to have its the parameters around that set by the legislature, and they have chosen to set it up as a pool. As I talked about it, my view is over time, which it takes a certain amount of time to get comfortable with this concept, but over time, I can envision seeing different levels of risk. But
okay.
There are two restrictions to that. One is, I think, just how government likes to move slowly and methodically. And the second one is internally in our office, we're really, and we have great staff and they work very hard, and they are working a lot. And this may sound familiar, I don't know, but they're working a lot with 1990s vintage spreadsheets that have been brought forward, and I often say that the state has been remarkably good at being cheap, but not necessarily inexpensive. So we have, just so you understand, all of our securities are held in a custodial bank. And the custodial bank then issues a report which takes one reconciliation by our office to then put into another system which does the distributions. And then that in turn has to be reconciled to generate a report for the state's WOLF's system, and that takes a third set of reconciliations. So almost every transaction we have takes 3 reconciliations. Any individual trade ticket that we execute takes 5 signatures. So when you start multiplying that, it costs $19.5 billion. You can see the volume. Now we're able to execute this stuff, but we're really trying to streamline that system so that we can be more efficient in how we handle those things. So I don't want to put too much on my staff because we've got the 19.5 and an education problem and legislature that's anxious to make sure that they have lots of money. And so taking a small body and putting 80% of our work on that would not necessarily be the right thing to do.
So I have 2 more quick questions for you. Is it your assumption, the way House Bill 79 is written and marked up now, if the Game and Fish Trust Fund were included in this bill, is it your assumption that you would work cooperatively with the commission as far as how much of our trust fund would be invested?
Well, let me answer that a couple of ways. First off, the bill's been laid back, so they've started working on it, but I think there's another iteration that we're going to see that comes out of that. But second off, I guess to the point I was making, well, to answer directly your question, from my standpoint, and I don't think you can write everything into law, but from my standpoint, it is the responsibility of the treasurer to work with you. Absolutely. It is the money that you have, and we need to make sure that you are confident that it's safe and secure. But more importantly, before we would ever do anything, we would want to understand what your needs were, what your liquidity requirements were, what you anticipated over the long haul, and we would want to work to report back to you exactly what returns had been, and what we anticipated for returns over the future, and so on. So that would be a very close communication, yes. But the third thing is, going back to the point I made at the beginning, what I'm really concerned about is if we have every agency starting to say, well, we don't think we ought to have that much of this, we ought to have that something of that, that becomes now a very complicated situation, very hard to know who's the fiduciary in that relationship. So it seems very important to us to have very straightforward methodology, direct communication, and then you give us the authority to manage those funds, which you have already given us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and perhaps reviewed on a yearly basis. Or...
Absolutely.
Okay.
We actually, just so you know, quarterly. Now, it's not just the treasurer that does this. The system we have has the State Loan and Investment Board. The treasurer executes what the State Loan and Investment Board recommends and passes. The State Loan and Investment Board retains a consultant, RVK, which that analyzes the portfolio and reports on a quarterly basis. Plus, then the treasurer also makes available on a monthly basis what our returns are.
And can you set my mind at ease on one more thing? If we invest in this, can you give me assurance that these monies will not be endangered of being used by another entity or the legislature? I mean, if I'm correct, this was statutorily set up, and it would literally take an act of the legislature to use these funds for a different purpose. But there's a lot of concern out there, I can tell you this, there's a lot of concern out there that if we invest in this, we'll lose control of it.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Culver, I wish I could say that the legislature didn't have a global view of what their capacity was. I think that laws are laws, and they should not. I mean, there's nothing in this bill that is going to make your fund any more endangered than it currently is.
Thank you.
But in times of stress, who knows what the legislature is capable of.
Thank you.
Commissioner Price, or Commissioner Culver, were you?
I'm done.
You're
Thank
done.
Okay, the way our fund is set up is.
Carrie, could you slide that mic a little closer to him, please?
Oh, you're not talking to you. Thank you, Rick. Thank you very much.
The way our fund is set up is we have the corpus of the fund, and the rules read that we cannot touch that, but we must use the interest that comes off that and be brought out, put into basically our operating fund, and then used for things like, habitat restoration and things like this. So within this parameter, we put the money in. It grows, let's say, at a faster rate than we are currently getting, but we have to be able to draw that out on an annual basis to be able to use to meet the requirements of the way that fund is set up. Will that work for you within this?
Madam Chair and Commissioner Price, I don't believe this bill in any way alters the mandate that you have for your trust. And it certainly from our standpoint, we would have to deliver the same interest and dividends to you that you currently get.
The same increase in value. Now, on the other hand,
that would increase over time.
Yeah, the same interest rate. The other part is that we have specified funds as we collect them. Let's say the license, lifetime license fees. 50% of those go in to this corpus. So there's a way to put that in. It may increase it a little bit, but then we're going to draw out the interest rate. So, but that will be manageable within the system.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Price, yes, I don't see any effective difference in how you would run the fund, only in the way it's invested.
The way it's simply the internal investments, and then whatever investment plus or minus comes out. Okay, thank you.
Commissioners, any other questions?
President Little, we have a very smart young lady that's in charge of our budget, and I would like to hear any questions, concerns, or advice that she has to offer us.
President Little, Commissioner Culver, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you both gentlemen for coming. I do have one additional question. It says in the bill as it's drafted right now with markup that up to 60% of the entire pool can be invested. Is there any intent or plan for the remaining 40%, and will that be modified on a monthly basis based on yield? And it sounded like you review that every month, correct, at the most frequency?
We both want to answer. Madam Commissioner, very, very good question. But yeah, I think the bill, and I'll let Patrick speak to sort of the actual management and how we would look at this. The bill speaks to up to 60% in equities. Some of that is modified or borrowed from some of the language that relates to the permanent fund, which currently is set at 55%. I think this is the legislature's attempt to set a restriction on the sort of risk that we would be taking. So I wanted to give you a little bit of history on that, and also tell you that this says may, and that's an incredibly important statement, because it does not mean that if it gets signed by the governor, we're going to go execute a bunch of trades so that we're 60% equities on March 5th. It does mean that we have the latitude to be able to gradually move in that direction. Your question was about what happens to the other 40%. I'll let Patrick take a swing at whatever he wants.
Madam President, to get to the actual, I can get into very good detail about how much it would move if you're talking about percentages and so forth. If you want to get into, I could give you the overview or an in-depth conversation. I don't know how much, because if I get into the in-depth. Okay, so right now, you're invested in the state agency pool, which has approximately 80% in bonds, fixed income securities. So with that, to understand the risk of that investment, it has a duration of approximately 5 years. What that means is 1% increase in interest rates will cause a 5% loss in the principal. So what we're doing, that is the highest it's been ever. What's happening is, just without getting details, that duration is going up. So many people think that this portfolio is very safe, and it is more risky now than it's ever been. So what we're trying to do is reduce that. So if that 60%, what we're saying, our view of the markets and how we would look at investing in this is, the markets are, as I said, not only bonds are very expensive, but stocks are very expensive. There's not a free lunch out there. There's certain things where we can move around the fringes, but the time that we would look to increase an equity allocation, meaning a large cap equity like something like the S&P 500, would be if we had a precipitous decline in prices and the valuation would warrant that type of investment for this long-term outlook. The remaining 40% would be in fixed income or fixed income-like securities. So that wouldn't change. You'd still have the 60-40 mix, but we would just look at saying, okay, when, as Treasurer Gordon alluded to, when the valuation would come and appear that now is the time to take a more aggressive role and increasing the equity allocation, we'd do it at that time. But with your funds on a long-term basis, if you're really looking at trying to get a higher return, having some type of equity mix is very, very important, not only from a risk-reward standpoint, but from a long-term creating equity.
Commissioner Price.
Now, this is the 60-40 brings up a question. If we're constrained to that, would we have to rebalance this periodically, the fund? In other words, suppose you do go in 60-40, and then and I know the stock market is not a good time to invest right now because it's at an all-time high and probably maybe headed down, you don't know. But if, let's say that it does go up so that your equities and stuff increase to 65%, then will we be required to rebalance?
Good question. Yes, Madam President, Commissioner, that is correct. And so that is just a normal asset allocation that you would do. And for instance, our equity exposure this year got above our asset allocation, and so we did sell some of those equities to be more in line. And that's just a very a practical sense approach to investments. You don't let those gains get out of control. You want to harvest some of those gains.
Okay, so that's already in place then.
That is correct.
Okay. I'm just kind of questioning these things as I see kind of how they could affect it. I'm done, thank you.
Commissioner Anselmi.
President Little, I want to repeat a question Mr. Price asked earlier. You just said, okay, you start selling the present fund. You got a lot of bonds, so you're selling bonds and loss. Is the way I understand what you just said, right? I mean, because rates are going up and some prices are going down, so you sell, you're going to take a loss. But did I hear you say earlier that the way you've got it layered that you won't take a loss? You know, I think he was concerned. We got $20 million in there. When we go sell $20 million into bonds, we're going to end up with $15 million to put in this new fund. Or are we going to end up with, it's $28 million, I think you said. We sell $28 million out of the fund called now, the public fund, or whatever it's called. Are we going to have $28 million to put in this new deal, or are we going to take our licking when we go to sell on that other one?
Madam President, Commissioner, when you're saying the 28 million and then you would have 15 million, you know, you're talking about a 25% haircut to do the transaction, and that was what I was alluding to before. We're talking about basis points. So, yeah, 100 basis points is 1%, and we're talking about, you know, the magnitude of a couple basis points, depending on how much it would be to reduce the exposure from one sector to another.
No, Madam Chair, I just have a clarifying point on that. I think what Patrick's referring to, and by duration and the risk that's involved, you know, what happens is the portfolio value decreases because the securities that yield or have a lower interest rate to them are not as valuable as the stuff that now has a better interest rate. So who wants them? And so that's why that value decreases, which is a problem that I think we're trying to make sure the legislature and others understand. It doesn't mean the actual interest payment that you get might not go up. I mean, it very well will go up, but you're going to be earning less. You're going to be earning a little bit more on less money. So net, you're probably going to be down a bit. But bonds are a very different world, as you know, than anything else. But this is a big problem for the state. The loss is going to be in the value of the portfolio. You still have the ability, to your point, about, you know, sort of couponing them out for the interest payments that are there. But if you do end up having to sell for some reason, then that value is going to be substantially less.
Any other questions, commissioners? Well, I would just like to say that I personally have a great deal of, I think this is a great plan by our state treasurer's office, and I supported it in my vote in November, and I also have a personal very high degree of faith in our state treasurer and his honor and his integrity and his intentions. But there's a saying out there, best laid plans. And I guess I've been concerned all along. I definitely would love to see this work, and I would love to see the game and fish funds have an opportunity to a higher return on investment someday. But I think that we don't just have the state treasurer's word on how it will turn out. I mean, we know we have a legislature with a lot of, well-intentioned and knowledgeable people, and this may turn out to be a great opportunity. And once we see all the parameters, and I'm hoping that that's what it does turn out to be, then I would be ready. But I want to see that first, and I want to know that the intentions that are there work out, and that our funds are safe to the degree that they can be in terms of investing, but safe in terms of always those are game and fish funds, and that is how they remain. So that is just my statement.
I'm going to make some more questions. The one thing that I have there, this has been presented as an opportunity to get in at first and be there. And this I'm going to come back as ask, will it be an opportunity to get in later to either this or a similar fund? Because right now, if you look at our fund, look at our fund, and it's basically in stocks and in bonds and that type of event. It's slowly decaying. If you've got 2% return on that, and inflation rate is running about 3%, even though they say, inflation's not, it is. That thing is slowly decaying, and what you're trying to do is move away from that someday. I support that. I think it's a good deal. The question is, getting into it. After then what Commissioner Little is talking about, when this goes into the legislature, you don't know what's going to come out the other end. That's why we're kind of concerned by going into it and then finding out that what comes out is not a very good thing. So I'm wondering if there's a way to get it in later on, or even at a different type thing.
So, Madam Chair, Commissioner Price, that's in fact exactly the reason why I recommended that you take a go slow approach, because I have no idea what the legislature will be doing with this piece of legislation. And, you know, there are a number of very new legislators, and we haven't had the benefit of time to sort of study and put together a committee bill. And, you know, it is a committee bill, but it was drafted after the November 8th election and kind of in haste. And so, you know, to answer your question, I will certainly advocate having another round. I hate to use the word tranche, which the legislature likes to use, but I am certainly anticipating another round of significant funds, and having, you know, a much more robust piece of legislation that makes sense. That also will have to pass by a 2/3 vote, because any fund that goes into this will have to be done that way. But that's very much the way I want to go forward, and you are in that next tier of funds that I think make a lot of sense. There are some others that obviously make a tremendous amount of sense, and then there are some that I think the legislature ought to spend some time discussing. You know, they parked almost $2 billion earning 2% as opposed to 6% in the legislative stabilization reserve account. If we'd been able to put that to work, you know, that could have been substantially more. So those are the kinds of conversations I want to see, and I think then, you know, the legislature would have the ability to move forward. I will tell you that there is general appreciation, at least amongst the JAC members that I have talked to, that say, you know, the Game and Fish Trust Fund is another very good candidate. I think it is, and so I think you would have support for doing that.
Okay, so you do feel that just waiting to see how this thing boils out, and then considering maybe in the second round might be there. Okay, I appreciate that answer, because this thing is presented to me as, you know, this is your chance to get in. And if it works out, fine, but it's like investing in a stock. You got a chance to get in, and sometimes it don't work out so good. And if you wait and understand it better, then you have a better chance.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Price, almost on a daily basis, we get approached by somebody who says, this is your chance to get in. And we very seldom do that.
Okay, thank you very much. And I want to thank you for your, you know, clarification, some questions I've had, and understanding this, explaining it better so that I do understand it. Thank you.
Thank you.
President Little,
Commissioner Culver.
when we left the House Appropriations Committee meeting the other night, it was with the understanding that this commission would take a vote on whether we wanted in this pool or not. In keeping with that, I am prepared to make a motion. And given the fact that this bill is still in the works, makes it a little tricky, but so I have written a motion down, because the wording is critical, and I've got a motion written down that has provisions attached to it, and I would like to read that if I can. I would move that the Commission support the inclusion of the Game and Fish Permanent Wildlife Trust account into House Bill number 79, providing that the percent of the Game and Fish Trust Fund created by Wyoming Statute 23-1-501F invested in equities could be determined by the Commission. And secondly, that the Commission, at its sole discretion, has the option to remove the Game and Fish Trust Fund created under Wyoming Statute 23-1-501F from the statutory trust fund investment pool and return it to the state agency pool if the rate of return over a 5-year period is equal to or less than that earned over the same 5-year period by the state agency pool. I think that allows us the flexibility that we would ask for. If we can get included into this bill, you know, I'm not supposed to be talking. I'm supposed to wait for a second. I apologize.
Commissioners?
I'll second it.
Okay, Sherry, obviously Commissioner Cloud is going to have to provide, or Commissioner Culver is going to have to provide us with that write-up. But we do have a second by Commissioner, and a second by Commissioner Clouda. Discussion.
Madam Chairman.
Commissioner Anselmi.
Madam Chairman, Commissioner Culver, I appreciate where you're coming from, but I'd have to vote against that. I don't think there's any rush to jump into this. We don't even know they don't know what's going on. And I think we should wait. I think we should, I'd rather see us keep our money in the state pool and wait to see what happens. I don't think there's a big rush. We're not in the need. We got $28 million, whether we're making 2% or 5% or even 10%. That doesn't change the way we do business every day. I mean, if we were up against a blade, we need an extra $200,000 or $500,000 to make things run around here. I might be more prone for it, but I don't see us really needing to jump into this thing for that extra little bit of return that we don't know what it is. So I'd have to vote against that.
And I guess my counter to that, Mark, would be that if they include us in the pool now with these provisions, then we have the flexibility to get in or out. If they include us in this bill now with these provisions, then we can say, you know, we want in now or we don't want in now, but we at least have that option.
I don't know if I agree with you. I don't know if your provisions outweigh what those guys up on the hill, they're making the laws, what they do. I mean, once you put I don't know if there's any guarantee. I know you have the best, you want the best to happen, but once it gets in their control, I don't know if that's the way it'll happen.
And again, that's why the provisions, because it isn't entirely in their control. We still have some control that we exercise over this fund. My concern is that if we don't get included in this initial bill, we might have a very difficult time getting the legislature to pass a bill including the Game and Fish Trust Fund in the future, is my concern.
Commissioner, fellow commissioners, so here's my concern with it. I mean, ultimately, I'd like to see this opportunity exist in the state. I would really like to see it. And of course, obviously, I expect that it will be done in the right way. But just even listening to your motion, I have to be honest with you, if this, if that, I mean, that's the kind of thing that could kill this piece of legislation from even happening. Oh, well, the Game and Fish has all these provisos. Well, what do the other funds have? All of this kind of stuff. I mean, you think about that. That's going to have to be written into that legislation. And this is a hot topic. So I support the idea of being able to invest our funds with the potential of a better return on the investment. And I would like to see this legislation go through. And I think that adding all of those kind of complications to it have a better chance of not having the legislation pass. And I'm not fearful that we can't get in later. If this thing works out, we won't be the only fund wanting to get in later. It isn't a now or never. I really don't believe that.
President,
Commissioner Price.
Could I ask a couple more questions?
Well, certainly. Yeah.
I just say the ones we abuse in would this thing, once we put this in like this, would this be basically, would it even be retained? The legislature would it's got to be a uniform thing from what you described. And we start adding provisions, and the answer like, well, we'd say one thing, one of the other entities say another thing. We've got to have this, we've got to have that, we've got to have that. And you talked about the difficulty of administering on that. And I guess I'm very much would like to get in, very much like to see an opportunity to increase. But I'm actually at this point going to vote no.
Any other comments and discussion?
Chairman.
Yes, Commissioner Anselmi.
Treasurer Gordon, right now, with the agency pool, nobody has any say on how things are done. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Anselmi, you can, we send the monies where you direct them in terms of the awards and so on, I believe. But no, as far as management of the funds and how they're invested and that sort of thing, no, you don't.
That's the way I envision this loan thing they're talking about. This is the pool, you put your money in there, and you don't be telling us how to, and that is, I don't know. Every thought that might not be how it happens, but that's the way things are run now. You put your money in there and you guys get, if it makes 2%, we get 2%. We have no way to tell you things and all this other.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Anselmi, that's exactly why I described it the way I did. We want to make sure that any fund that takes advantage of or is given the advantage to take the opportunity to be part of this new pool is appropriate for it. And that's part of the reason why we would want to discuss with you, what your mission is, what you consider your liability, how much you plan to award each year, what the timeline of that is. So we have all of those particulars in place so that we can say, yes, this would work for you, or no. And then, we want you to be very much part of that discussion. And then we want you very much to be informed on the performance of that. Because, as I see it, your job then is to execute what you need to do with that fund.
Commissioner Price.
Okay, there is a provision that, once a year, that the group, I believe, will consult with the investors on this once a year. So there is the opportunity to get input there, although I doubt that it'd be an opportunity to say, well, I want to change my share to this or that. It would be basically saying, look, we think maybe we can stand a little more risk, the group, or maybe a little less risk on the equities. Maybe we better shift to there. Say this is kind of our thing. But that, once we have an input there, that doesn't guarantee that our say is going to be solid. It will be information.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Price, I think, yes, that's exactly the case. I think of it more in the nature of what are your needs, what do you expect is going to happen over the course of the year. Here's the fund as it's laid out. These are the parameters of risk and reward. This is the efficient frontier. But we don't even say we're going to buy United Cannonball over Consolidated Lint. We basically structure it to get a performance out of the fund over time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any other discussion or questions while we have the experts here?
Yes, just one.
Absolutely.
One
Go ahead.
comment.
Commissioner Culver.
I ask you to think to yourself, if you sat there with $28 million in the bank, are you going to invest it in bonds? Or are you going to have an investor put that money to work for you where you have a better chance of earning interest? And I think it is our responsibility to maximize the income that we make from the corpus of this fund and use that money for wildlife habitat improvements.
Any other discussion?
I'll call for the question.
All right, we do have a motion. Does anybody need it?
Can you reread it again?
Yes, yeah, that's what I was just going to ask. Please,
Okay.
Commissioner Culver.
I move that the Commission support the inclusion of the Game and Fish Permanent Wildlife Trust account into the House Bill number 79, providing that the Commission, that the percent of the Game and Fish Trust Fund created by Wyoming Statute 23-1-501F invested in equities could be determined by the Commission. And secondly, that the Commission, at its sole discretion, has the option to remove the Game and Fish Trust Fund created under this act from statutory trust fund investment pool and return it to the state agency pool if the rate of return over a 5-year period is equal to or less than that earned over the same 5-year period by the state agency pool.
That's actually, in a way, a poison pill. Put into that. You have to listen to it, listen how it's going to be managed.
Yeah.
Let's go.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Culver, for rereading that. That is the motion on the floor. Hearing no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay.
Nay.
Motion. Yeah. Yes, you may. And I believe we had Commissioner Clouda and Commissioner Culver voting aye, and we had Commissioner Rael, Price, and Anselmi voting nay. So the motion does not pass. And there, I believe, is your, oh, yes.
I don't know if it's appropriate to make another motion that we decline to put our fund, what is this called?
Corpus.
Put the corpus in this newly created fund at this time. I don't know if we need to send them a signal that we don't want to go into this deal right now.
Well, I just think we did. I mean, are we, the motion to put our fund in there did not pass.
Okay.
So unless the department feels differently, I think our message is very clear. No, not at this time.
I do want to say thank you to Commissioner Gordon and Mr. Fleming for coming and listening and explaining this to us, making sure that you had the best explanation you could for us. And I think that I have a lot better understanding of it right now. I am very, very supportive of getting in. And I think that in the future, we ought to consider looking at this again. But let's see how it goes through.
See what you're getting into.
See what we've got into, and I don't want to get into it right now.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Price, if you understood, I will send you all or the department the same letter that we sent all of the regional funds, so we do a personal line on the next one.
Okay.
Thank you very much, and I won't repeat, but I'm like Commissioner Price. Thanks to both of you for coming today. It's been very informative, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'll speak to you later. Okay.
Deputy Director Kennedy, you are the last agenda item.
Madam President, members of the Commission, on a lighter note, this is the last agenda item of the day, and it has to do with the Blue Ribbon Panel on Sustaining America's Diverse Fish and Wildlife Resources. Blue Ribbon. And you all have, I know, heard of this panel before. It was established in September of 2014. It was charged with looking at the current system of conservation funding and recommending a new mechanism that'll conserve all fish and wildlife, not just game species, but looking at all fish and wildlife species. In terms of conservation funding, the panel recommended that Congress dedicate up to $1.3 billion annually in existing revenue from the development of energy and mineral resources on federal lands and waters, and that would be called or put into the program that is called the Wildlife Conservation Restoration Program. Those funds would provide states with the resources needed to implement state wildlife action plans that are designed to conserve species in greatest conservation need. I know that we've been giving you some updates on this Blue Ribbon Panel the last couple of commission meetings and on a one-on-one basis, and I know those commissioners that attended WAFWA probably heard an awful lot about the Blue Ribbon Panel, and specifically that the states have all been moving forward under the direction of the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies with with resolutions from their commission. And in fact, today the department's recommending a resolution to that effect to you today. So, Madam President, members of the commission, I know that you've looked at the resolution that was in your notebook. If you'd like, I can read this resolution, or we can discuss the resolution that you have and go from there. Your pleasure. We are recommending that you approve, and we do sign and implement this resolution. And today's agenda item is simple as that.
I actually think that it would be appropriate for you to read it.
Okay.
We have a lot of people on the phone and various things like that, and I think it's appropriate that it be in the meeting.
Okay. Madam President, members of the commission, this is a resolution of the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission supporting the recommendation of the Blue Ribbon Panel on sustaining America's diverse fish and wildlife resources, that Congress dedicate up to $1.3 billion annually in existing revenue from the development of energy and mineral resources on federal lands and waters to the Wildlife Conservation Restoration Program. Whereas Wyoming is home to unique populations of a tremendously diverse array of wildlife species, and whereas the Wyoming State Wildlife Action Plan prioritizes species of greatest conservation need and the habitats upon which they depend for survival, and whereas of the 226 species of greatest conservation need identified in the Wyoming State Wildlife Action Plan, only 11 are classified as game species. And whereas Congress passed the Pittman-Robertson, Dingell-Johnson, and Wallet-Brough Acts that establish user pay, user benefit funds to support conservation and science-based management of wildlife and sport fish species financed by hunters, recreational shooters, fishermen, and boaters. And whereas a similar dedicated and sustainable funding mechanism is lacking for species of greatest conservation need that are not hunted, fished, or trapped. And whereas Wyoming has a statutory responsibility to protect, preserve, perpetuate, and manage all species of fish and wildlife in Wyoming. And whereas proactive conservation actions for species of greatest conservation need are necessary to maintain healthy, sustainable populations and prevent federal listing under the Endangered Species Act. And whereas the Blue Ribbon Panel on Sustaining America's Diverse Fish and Wildlife Resources, made up of 26 business and conservation leaders, was tasked with recommending a new funding mechanism to support state fish and wildlife conservation to ensure the sustainability of all fish and wildlife for current and future generations. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission supports the recommendation of the Blue Ribbon Panel on Sustaining America's Diverse Fish and Wildlife Resources, that Congress dedicate up to $1.3 billion annually in existing revenue from the development of energy and mineral resources on federal lands and waters to the Wildlife Conservation Restoration Program to diversify funding and management of all wildlife. And now, therefore, be it resolved that the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission respectfully requests that the Wyoming congressional delegation support federal legislation, including H.R. 5650, entitled Recovering America's Wildlife Act of 2016, that would implement this recommendation by amending the Pittman-Robertson Act to make additional dedicated federal funding available for management of fish and wildlife species of greatest conservation need as determined by state fish and wildlife agencies. And now, therefore, be it resolved that because securing dedicated federal funding is likely to require a non-federal state match similar to that in place for the Pittman-Robertson and Dingell-Johnson Acts, the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission encourages efforts that would enable funding mechanisms to support state agency contribution for wildlife conservation and implementation of the Wyoming State Wildlife Action Plan.
Thank you so much.
Madam President?
Yes, Commissioner Culver.
This was a topic of discussion at WAFWA, and many of the other commissions, if not most, have already signed this and submitted it to their legislators. And I would encourage this commission to do the same. If I'm correct, and Scott, keep me straight here, but I think this fund has the potential to generate for the Wyoming Game and Fish just over $13 million a year, if I'm correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And given the fact that my fellow weak-kneed commissioners wouldn't vote to invest our money so we can make some money, I think we need this.
You want to get some money from somewhere.
Now you're beginning to sound like the Democrats complaining about Trump's election.
So I would move that our commission vote to sign this.
Madam Chair, question.
Absolutely.
You read in there, is this gonna replace Pittman Robinson?
Madam President, Commissioner Cloud, no, it will not replace it. It'll be set up as a similar model as the Pittman Robertson.
I thought you said it was gonna repeal Pittman Robinson.
No. Right.
Amended it. So Pittman Robinson will stay the same, and we will still receive those funds, and then this will be in addition to Pittman Robinson and Dingleman Johnson.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now that begs a question for me all of a sudden. It's not amending the Pittman Robertson, is it? It's separate legislation, isn't it?
It's an amendment.
Is it an amendment?
This recommendation by amending the Pittman Robertson
Oh,
Act
you're
to
right.
make additional
You're right.
dedicated funding. And presumably this additional funding would be distributed the same way there, unless they get to messing around.
Well, I'm going to jump to the conclusion that that's what Commissioner Cloud is thinking of, is just one, which, I mean, it's always a little concern when they get in and mess with something that's working.
Just so you know, the Democrats were listening.
You are. And I understand your concern.
President Little, I support it. I'm concerned, but I think that it will probably hold. There will be just additional monies going into that. That's the way I see it.
Madam President, members of the commission, the department agrees with that, as do every state wildlife agency in the country.
Okay. So Sherry, just because I haven't repeated and I want to make sure that you understand where we're at. So we actually have a motion to accept the recommendation to approve a resolution that supports the Blue Ribbon Panel's recommendation. And we have that by Commissioner Culver, correct? Mm-hmm. And we have a second by Commissioner Anselmi. Yes. Are you good? Okay. All right. Is there any further discussion or any questions for Deputy Director Kennedy?
Question?
If not, then yes. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And all those opposed, please say nay. Motion carries.
Madam President, members of the commission, thank you very much for that support. This has a long ways to go, but we'll keep you posted throughout the process.
Thank you very much. Yep. Having nothing else on my agenda for the day, I would offer up a call to the public if there is anyone who would like to speak on any topic or a fresh one. No? If not, then open session begins tomorrow at 9 a.m. And just a reminder, because on our agenda we had 7:30 for the breakfast at Little America, but Deputy Director Kennedy pointed out to us this morning that he expects those attending to be there at no later than 7:15.
That would be good.
Jeez.
Sorry, Richard.
So, if not, I'd take on a motion to adjourn.
I make the motion, we adjourn for the day.
So the motion was made by Commissioner Price and seconded by Commissioner Anselmi. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed to say nay. Motion carries.